Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Buying, Selling, Relocating Assisted Living or Nursing Home Beds in North Carolina. Your panelists for this webinar are Joy Heath, Healthcare Partner, and Dee Dee Murphy, Healthcare Associate, both in the Raleigh office of Williams Mullen. Joy, let's begin with some introductions.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining in for the webinar today. We're delighted to have each of you participating. It's certainly a privilege to spend some time talking with you today about the important topic of how you can buy, sell, and relocate beds in North Carolina. I'm pleased to have on the panel with me today Dorothy H. Dee Dee Murphy, who joined the firm not terribly long ago, and I'm delighted she's here. I hired her. She is not once, twice, but three times a Tar Heel, having earned her undergraduate degree as well as her law degree, and then for good measure, a master's in public health, all from UNC. So apologies to our Blue Devils or Wolfpack attendees, but we've got a true blue Tar Heel. And again, I think Dee Dee adds a great depth of experience to our healthcare group, joining several of us on board here at Williams Mullen from a background of consulting with healthcare clients in various sectors of the industry on planning projects, implementing projects, and ensuring that both the development and operational stages of the projects are completed in accordance with applicable law. So we're really glad to have Dee Dee on board here at the firm, and I'm happy to have her participating with us here today.
Thank you, Joy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dee Dee Murphy, and as Joy mentioned, I recently joined Williams Mullen. Actually joined back in December. I am happy to be on board with this great law firm, and I'm very fortunate to be working with Joy. She has close to 30 years experience in the industry, so it's great to be learning from her. She has experience representing clients in the healthcare industry in certificate of need matters, regulatory compliance, legislative strategies, and business transactions for healthcare companies. And to boot, she has the best war stories.
I clearly must have started at age 12 if I've got 30 years of experience. That can only be the applicable math there. So, all right, with that.
And actually, before we get started, sorry to interrupt, Joy, but we have a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We invite you all to ask questions throughout the program. There's going to be a chat feature. There's a button in the top left-hand corner of your screen. This will open up a whole entire chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. So please shoot us some questions throughout the presentation, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. Also, please make sure to place any of your cell phones away from your landline. This will help to eliminate or reduce any call interference. And also, we will, at the end of today's webinar, send out copies of today's slide presentations. And finally, we have been approved for continuing education course credit, an hour of credit. So for those of you who are interested in receiving CE credit for today's webinar, please feel free to email me following the webinar, and I can send you the certificate. And now I will turn it over to Joy.
Thanks again, Dee Dee. In our webinar invitation, we kind of queried the audience, if you will, as to what your interests are. And perhaps what brings you here today is considering whether your facility has an optimal number of beds or could enhance its operations by adding bed capacity. Perhaps you're interested in knowing what the options might be in terms of relocating beds either within your existing county or across a county line. You may be a provider interested in selling either your facility in its entirety or perhaps selling a portion of your bed capacity to another provider that could make use of those beds. So thinking about some of our objectives for today, we'd like to spend the next hour hopefully sharing some insight on how you can use the North Carolina CON process to facilitate your goals, be they buying or selling, replacing, or relocating. We hope to provide you with some answers to questions that you may have on really how this process works and what the applicable timing considerations might be. We also want to spend a little bit of time just highlighting for you some of the recent activity across our state that has involved the sale and relocation of beds, be they nursing home or assisted living beds. And just a terminology note, I'll say assisted living beds. The law typically uses the wording adult care homes, but of course, as we all know, I'm talking about one and the same in using either set of terms there, so no distinction to be drawn. I also want to talk a little bit about the Brunswick County need, bit of a buzz among the health industry about the large need in Brunswick. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And also just touch on the SCU moratorium. Now, when we think about the CON process, I think most of us think about the state plan or the SMFP. Obviously, this is the key planning document, the planning section. State Health Coordinating Council put a lot of work each year into developing this document. It's kind of a roadmap for providers as to where the state has identified a need for the development of new services, the acquisition of equipment, and such as that. And really the function of the plan is to set a limit on the number of new beds that might be needed in any given community, county, across the state. And for better or worse, the limits in the plan are just that. They're really the determinative limitation on the number of new beds that can be proposed and ultimately can receive CON approval. And for those of you who follow the developments, many of you will recollect the big nursing home bed need from a few years ago. It was a 340-bed need that the state plan identified, and that sparked the attention of many providers. The state ended up receiving a total of 16 CON applications proposing to fulfill part of that bed need determination that had been identified for Wake County. And to date, Universal has received a CON out of that review for a small bed addition, and Bella Rose was awarded a certificate of need to develop a 100-bed nursing facility. And in full disclosure, that was our client, Bella Rose. We participated throughout that process on behalf of the proponents of that project, and we're pleased to receive the CON, if you will, the holy grail there of the quest for the development of a new nursing home in Wake County. Believe it or not, that case is still on appeal. We may see a ruling from the Court of Appeals, not today, but perhaps next Tuesday, or perhaps they'll hold on to it for even longer. But the remaining applicants in that review are still awaiting the verdict of our Court of Appeals as to the ultimate outcome there. A little more recently, some of you may have followed the developments in Chatham County. A lot of providers were interested in the development of a facility in Chatham County, somewhat proximate to the Chapel Hill market, and 5 applications were submitted in that review. That case was ultimately settled, and Liberty was awarded the certificate of need subsequent to the resolution of that case. And it's interesting to note that Liberty proposed a special care unit, and we do sometimes get questions from providers about the moratorium. What took place in the Chatham review was that the proposed SCU would be developed after the expiration of the limitation placed by the moratorium. So that is how that was able to work, if you will. When they filed the CON application, the moratorium was applicable, but in as much as the special care unit proposed wasn't to be developed until after the term of the moratorium, the project was approved, including that SCU. So again, the plan is really our defining document in a sense as to what you can and can't do in any given year in long-term care in our state. If you look at the 2015 plan and your interest lies in the development of nursing homes, you may find that, well, goodness, there was only one small need in nursing for nursing home beds in our state, and that was in Davie County as a result of a petition. That application has already been filed and is in process now. So that was not much, if you will, in terms of any kind of forecast of need in the plan for nursing home beds. If you turn over to the adult care home page in the plan, you do see that there were small bed needs in the sparsely populated counties of Jones and Washington. I believe no applications came in on those need identifications, but there is the big bed need in Brunswick. So in Brunswick, the state has indicated that 340 adult care home beds are needed, and the applications on those projects will go in later this summer. So thinking about what we see when we look at the state plan relative to both nursing homes and assisted living facilities, well, there's no reviews remaining for nursing homes, and there's the big need in Brunswick County, and as I mentioned, that's got an August 17th filing opportunity. But unless you happen to be interested in going into Brunswick with adult care home beds, you may look at this plan and say, boy, this looks pretty limited. This is really restrictive. There's really not much I can do in North Carolina this year. And what we want to spend the balance of our time talking to you about is maybe rethinking that perspective on 2015 opportunities and perhaps realizing the broad, not limited, but rather there are a number of options for providers who are informed and perhaps a little creative as to what they can do within our state. So despite the overall lack of need determinations in the plan, there are still ways in which providers can acquire, sell, replace, or relocate both adult care and nursing home beds in our state. In fact, proposals to acquire an entire existing health service facility and the equipment owned by that facility can proceed under the exemption process, which is a process Dee Dee and I are very familiar with. We've coordinated with clients to accomplish exemptions on any number of occasions in the past. It's a fairly straightforward prior written notice process that is available to providers under the statutory provision that's quoted here on your slide. Also, it's important to realize that North Carolina has carved out an exemption opportunity for providers that want to renovate their facility. You can do extensive renovations to your facility exceeding $2 million by relying on the exemption process. In fact, you can tear your nursing home down and build the whole thing all over again at the same site and not require CON approval to do so. You can expand the footprint of your facility and make the building larger without adding bed capacity, and again, you can rely on the exemption process to do so. Now, if you are doing that, there is a notice requirement, as I mentioned, and specific to these replacement, renovation, expansion processes, or motivations, if you will, you've got to explain your purpose to the CON section, and there's a list of permissible purposes outlined in the statute. You can do this for the purpose of converting semi-private rooms to private rooms. There certainly seems to be a preference among seniors in securing access to a private room. There's exceptions to that, but there is certainly a demand for private rooms. Providers responding to that need can rely on the exemption process to allow them to do so. There are providers who want to move their facilities, update them, if you will, to a neighborhood design and offer things like small dining spaces that accommodate maybe 15, 18, 20 residents in a more home-like dining setup as compared to the older model of a large dining area that accommodated all residents within the same room. Another permissible purpose for renovation that can be exempt under the CON process is if you're expanding the common areas and the living space to enhance the quality of life for your residents. Renovations that upgrade or expand these common spaces in your facility, again, can be exempt from review. So if you want to do any number of things under the CON law as outlined in the last few slides, these are things that can be accomplished this year in North Carolina. We're now going to turn to the policies that govern relocation, and as promised, I'm going to give the hard work to Dee Dee to kind of unpack these policies. They're somewhat detailed, and there's information here that needs to be parsed through by anyone looking to relocate. So I'm going to turn it over to her to really go through the details here of these policies for your information.
And unpacking is a good way to put it, Joy. I realize that there are a lot of words on your screen right now, and we're going to walk through all of these together. So if you are in a county that currently does not have a need determination for either additional adult care home or nursing facility beds, that does not preclude you from relocating those types of beds. And the relocation of those types of beds is addressed under Policy NH6 relative to nursing facility beds and Policy LTC2 relative to adult care home beds. These policies appear in the beginning of the state medical facilities plan. These policies between nursing facility beds and adult care home beds are substantively the same. If you're dealing with a relocation of beds within the county in which you reside, there are no additional requirements there. You can either propose to acquire beds from another provider within your county, or likewise to sell beds to another provider or a new provider within that same county. The real analysis is relative to relocating beds across county lines, and there are a number of different boxes you need to check to make sure that that is a proposal that works under either Policy NH6 or LTC2. So we're going to walk through those now. If you want to relocate beds across county lines, you first have to ensure that you are relocating from contiguous counties. You can either look at a map, or what I like to do is consult Appendix C of the SMSP. It provides a nice listing of the contiguous counties. Your second inquiry is going to be looking at the county from which you propose to relocate the beds. Look at the facility there. It has to serve at least one resident of the county to which you're proposing to relocate the beds to.
So, for instance, if you're planning to acquire beds from a facility in Durham and move those beds over to Wake, that's something you could do in 2015, but the state is going to want to see that the Durham facility was already serving at least one Wake County resident. That gives the state some assurance that you're moving the beds, if you will, in the right direction, bringing them closer to the homes of the patients that are already being served over in Durham County by bringing the beds into Wake County. So one of the things that must be documented to comply with the policy is that current service to patients from the county into which you are moving the beds.
Correct. So the next inquiry will be looking at the deficit or surplus of either nursing facility or adult care home beds. You'll see these are numbers 1 and 2 on slide 14. So we first want to look and demonstrate that the proposed relocation will not result in a deficit of licensed beds in the county that's losing those beds. And in a moment, we're actually going to walk through a couple of examples that will highlight this for you guys. The second point is you also have to demonstrate that the proposal will not result in a surplus of licensed beds in the county that is gaining those beds. So as I mentioned, policy LTC2 is the policy relative to adult care home beds, and that is the same as what we just walked through relative to nursing facility beds. The next couple of slides, I'm going to point out a couple of pieces of good information that are found in the appendices to the North Carolina State Medical Facilities Plan. The first being Appendix A, which includes a map of the health service areas, or HSAs as they're commonly referred to. As you can see, all the counties are identified here in North Carolina, and they are color-coded according to HSA. This is an important thing to acknowledge, as Joy will discuss later in our presentation. A lot of the filing deadlines for these types of proposals are dictated by which HSA your county falls into. So good reference point in the SMFP. The next page here, if you don't want to look at a map and figure out which counties are contiguous, a very easy reference point, as I mentioned earlier, is Appendix C. It includes a list of all contiguous counties.
I don't know about you, and then maybe this qualifies me as a nerd, but I find this fascinating. I mean, this kind of takes the guesswork out of determining what borders touch which, and I think you'd be surprised in some instances to see how many counties are considered contiguous. I think Iredell tops the list with 9 counties that actually at some point touch the border of Iredell and thus are contiguous. And obviously this is the gateway through which you can file a CON application to relocate assisted living or nursing home beds. So it's a pretty ready reference to show you where you can go or where you can draw beds from.
So our next couple of slides, we've got some case studies for you guys. The first one relates to nursing care beds, and we're going to look at Alexander County. As we saw earlier with the need determinations, there were no need determinations for additional nursing facility beds in Alexander County. But if you're a provider in Alexander County and you wish to increase the capacity of your facility, is that the end of the story? No, there are other options for you. So if you would like to relocate additional beds to your facility, that's something you can do under policy NH6, but you have to make a couple of inquiries. The first being, you have to identify those contiguous counties. Look to Appendix C, and we see that those contiguous counties are Caldwell, Catawba, Iredell, and Wilkes. The other piece that you'll need to make sure is wherever you are relocating the beds from, you need to ensure that that facility is currently serving at least one resident of Alexander County. And then finally, and what we've got in the table here, we need to look at the deficit and surplus numbers. And for nursing care beds, these numbers appear in Table 10B of the SMFP. So we've got listed here, Alexander County currently has a deficit of 36 nursing care beds. Caldwell, Catawba, Iredell, and Wilkes, the contiguous counties, currently all have a surplus. If we wanted to relocate beds to Alexander, we can relocate as many as 36, and we can relocate them from any combination of these other counties that have a surplus. However, we cannot relocate any more than 36, as that would result in a surplus of beds in Alexander County, which would not be permissible under policy NH6. And unfortunately, since we just have an hour, we can't go through every possible combination, but Joy and I have taken the time to look and see what some of the available opportunities are for providers, and we would like to mention a couple of those.
Sure. I think it's interesting to see that there are opportunities here all over the state. For example, if you wanted to look at Brunswick County, as we talked about a little bit earlier, Brunswick County has the large adult care home bed need, and proposals in response to that bed need will come in later this summer. It's interesting to see that a provider could acquire beds from a neighboring county such as Columbus or New Hanover and propose to relocate those nursing home beds into Brunswick County. So if you wanted to do something like a combination facility, you could rely on the policy to propose to relocate beds out of those counties and into Brunswick, perhaps in conjunction with a proposal to develop some of the needed adult care home beds. We often have providers talk to us about hot markets in the state. Everybody wants to go, among others, to Mecklenburg. If you look at the plan, you could pull beds out of Gaston and move them into Mecklenburg. Mecklenburg has a deficit, Gaston has a surplus. If you acquire beds in Gaston County, you could apply through the CON process to relocate those beds into Mecklenburg. Wake County has a significant deficit in the plan. If you want nursing home beds in Wake County, a strategic alternative that is open to you in 2015 is to pull beds out of a neighboring county such as Durham or Nash or several others and propose through the CON process to relocate those beds into Wake County to meet needs that you would identify and discuss in your CON application. That is an option that's open.
Thank you, Joy. Our next case study, we're going to look at adult care home beds, and we've also selected Alexander County. It's a good example for us here. So first inquiry, yet again, we're looking at contiguous counties, Caldwell, Catawba, Iredell, and Wilkes. Also, once again, we need to make sure that the facility that you are relocating the beds from, that currently serves at least one resident of Alexander County. And then we need to look at those deficit and surplus numbers. And for adult care home beds, these numbers are available in Table 11B of the SMSP. So we've got those numbers in the table here on slide 19. And as you can see, Alexander County has a deficit of 27 adult care home beds. And Caldwell, Catawba, and Iredell counties all have a surplus of beds, while Wilkes County has a deficit of 17 beds. So here, if we wanted to increase capacity at a facility in Alexander County, we can do that. However, we would not be able to relocate any beds from Wilkes County as they already have a deficit of beds, but we could relocate as many as 27 beds from either Catawba, Caldwell, or Iredell counties, but no more than that, as it would result in a surplus for Alexander County. And here again, relative to adult care home beds, while we don't have time to walk through all the available possibilities, we did want to highlight a couple of opportunities.
Sure. I think just looking through the plan, you can see that there's an opportunity to add assisted living beds to a market like Morehead City in Carteret County. It's an interesting option. Sometimes we have providers, again, expressing an interest in being as close by or in a bedroom community to Charlotte. You could move beds into, for instance, Monroe in Union County using this process. Boone in Watauga County is a desirable location and one that you could rely on the policy to relocate the beds into that area. An assisted living provider in Macon County could apply in July of 2015 to acquire and relocate beds from a neighboring county. Specifically, under the plan, you could propose to draw beds out of Cherokee or out of Clay. A provider in Alamance could either acquire or sell beds in Alamance County itself. There are over 700 assisted living beds in Alamance County. An assisted living provider in Montgomery could sell beds which could be bought and relocated to other counties. For instance, Stanley County could take beds from Montgomery into Stanley County, just as an example. And there are really any number of other combinations that you can see in looking at the dynamics in the plan that Dee Dee's just described for you.
Correct. So what this tells us is that the scope of your proposal is critical in determining whether or not it satisfies either policy NH6 or LTC2, because the scope of your proposal directly impacts this deficit surplus calculation. So the important thing to recognize here is that if you're proposing to acquire beds, you can acquire a portion of beds from a seller, and you can acquire a portion that will allow your facility to meet that deficit surplus calculation. So as I just stated, an existing facility can sell any number of its licensed beds. I know that probably a number of existing providers out there are familiar with the fact that you can acquire a facility wholesale, but what we're talking about here is acquiring a portion of beds, and there's really a lot of available opportunity, as Joy highlighted. It's also important to note that You could acquire a handful of beds from provider A and another handful of beds from provider B. There are really kind of endless possibilities to consider, but you have to consider it all within the framework of LTC2 and NH6 in determining whether or not it's permissible. These beds that you're acquiring could either be relocated to an existing facility or relocated and developed in conjunction with the construction of a brand new facility.
And I think you can see pretty readily, just looking back at some of the 2014 filings, that folks are doing these projects. They're doing them all over the state. Here's one that was proposed in 2014, Cumberland County Rehab Center. They were proposing to relocate nursing home beds from one facility and assisted living beds from a different facility to bring those together to develop a new combination facility. In Cabarrus County, there was a project. This one was interesting. The applicant had previously obtained approval for a 60-bed replacement facility, and then they filed a subsequent CON application under the change of scope cost overrun category, and in that proposed to relocate 48 assisted living beds to that previously approved replacement facility location. Many of you may have observed the various universal filings that went in last year. Those were an interesting combination of beds being moved from hither and yon. I mean, they were moving beds to kind of restructure the capacity of a handful of different facilities that Universal operated in and around Wake and Nash County. And as you can see, some of those were kind of interesting hybrids where they were renovating facilities, adding beds, pulling beds from different locations. Or you can see more straightforward proposals. Here's one from 2014, the Westfield Rehab and Health Center, simply relocating 20 beds from one facility to that Westfield facility. So the variations are many here in terms of possibilities, and they can be as detailed as the Universal projects were, or they can be a simple bed relocation where you simply acquire a certain number of beds and propose to relocate them to your existing facility.
So proposals to relocate beds, there's a couple of musts that we must have here. They must satisfy the relevant portions of either policy NH6 or LTC2, and we've got an and there to indicate that proposals can involve both types of beds. That's another possibility there. In addition to having to conform to all the statutory review criteria, there are a couple of additional considerations that we want to bring up relative to whether you're adding the beds to an existing facility or developing them in conjunction with a new facility. If you are wanting to add beds to an existing facility, one of the important considerations you have to look at is the sizing of your common spaces. This can be your dining room, your activity room, living room, even your parking spaces. You also have to make sure that you conform with the applicable performance standards. These look at both historical and projected occupancy. And then finally, you have to consider the facility's quality track record. And a little bit later, Joy's going to talk to you guys about the current analysis under Criterion 20, which is the pattern analysis. And then finally, when you're developing beds in conjunction with the establishment of a new facility, here again, you have to ensure that you conform with the applicable performance standards. Now, because it's a new facility, you don't have to worry about historical occupancy standards, but you do have to worry about meeting projected occupancy thresholds. So that first consideration that we just mentioned relative to relocating beds to an existing facility was sizing of common spaces. And I know we've got a lot of language here on this slide, my apologies, but what it all comes down to is the fact that if you are adding beds to an existing facility, you need to make sure that you have adequate common areas for that additional capacity that you've added. These provisions go through and talk about how the square footage of common space is directly related to the number of licensed beds that you have in a facility. So if you're increasing your capacity, you likewise have to increase the sizing of those common areas. And this is the same with nursing facility beds as well as adult care home beds. So we recommend that if you're adding beds to an existing facility, that you do look through all these policies in the North Carolina Administrative Code and make sure that you're meeting all those square footage provisions.
And you know, this is really just a checkpoint. It's not necessarily a roadblock. I mean, if your common areas that exist within your facility are not adequate to encompass the addition of beds, you can expand your common areas to make sure that you've got what you need. But you need to be mindful of the requirements. They may dictate if you want to do a zero capital cost project, you need to take a look at the size of your spaces to decide whether that's something that can be accomplished or whether you're going to need to factor in the expansion of spaces into what you propose to do. You can get there from here. You just need to consider these questions at the outset to frame your project.
Definitely. The next consideration that we have relates to performance standards. And there are performance standards for both nursing facility beds and adult care home beds. They are very similar. They both look at historical occupancy as well as projected occupancy. And for nursing facility beds, here on page 25, the historical occupancy standard is in provision A. The state is going to look at the 9 months immediately preceding the filing of the application, and they want to see that the facility operated at least 90%. Now, this is a bright line threshold amount. Either you meet it or you don't. If you don't meet it, the application will be denied. This is something that a facility has to meet historically. If you don't meet it, you can continue to operate and maybe put off your filing for a couple of months until you are meeting that historical occupancy standard. But there's no way around it. You have to meet that. And relative to projected occupancy, you have to project to be at least 90% no later than 2 years following the completion of the proposed project.
And just a few thoughts on this. I mean, often this is kind of a gimme because the reason clients are talking to us about defining a project for the expansion of their facility is because they're busting at the seams, they've got a waiting list, their beds are full. But sometimes you need to take a careful look at the numbers, even though you perceive that you are operating at a near capacity setup. You need to verify that you really do, when you crunch the numbers, meet these standards. Also, in terms of the projection component of this performance standard, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. When you decide how many beds you want to acquire and add to your facility, you have to do so mindful of the expectation that you're going to have to make a realistic projection of filling those beds to an average of 90% within 2 years of opening the beds. So that may influence how many beds you want to acquire when you look to add to the capacity of your facility.
All right. The next slide, we have the performance standards for adult care home beds. As I mentioned, very similar to those that we just looked at for nursing facility beds. The historical occupancy standard is, once again, the state's going to look at the 9 months immediately preceding the filing of the application. But here for adult care home beds, they just have to achieve 85%. And I say just, but 85 is still a very high number here. But as Joy indicated, a lot of clients are wanting to expand because they are busting at the seams. And as far as projected occupancy standards, they have to project to be at least 85% no later than 2 years following the completion of the proposed project for additional adult care home beds. And the third consideration that facilities need to look at in considering adding beds to an existing facility is looking at their facility's quality track record, and I'm going to let Joy address this.
If this is the criterion 20 under the CON review criteria, that call for the state to look at whether there is evidence that the provider has provided quality in the past. And there's some question, there's any number of measures of quality. Many of us are familiar with the STAR rating program, for example, for adult care home facilities, Medicare.gov, other sources of quality information. Some question as to how the state will look at quality under Criterion 20. And this is part of what's being considered in the appellate case that we talked about earlier that came from the Wake County review of several years ago that remains pending as we speak. How is the agency to be looking at Criterion 20? Historically, the agency was inclined to find a provider non-conforming with Criterion 20 if they had a particular incident in the county at issue. There's been a suggestion that perhaps the state should look instead at a broader picture and the types of quality issues and whether they constitute a pattern inconsistent with evidence of quality of care having been provided in the past. Again, we expect to have some guidance from the court before too much longer, I suppose, on how Criterion 20 will in fact be applied going forward by the state. But I think the takeaway from this discussion, putting aside perhaps some esoteric considerations, is that track record is important to look at. If you're expanding your facility and you've got a clean as a whistle past record, great. If there's something that needs to be considered, that should be an analysis that's done before the provider puts too much time, effort, and money into the process, lest there be an issue on Criterion 20 that would preclude the development of the project. So it's, along with space and occupancy, it's something that we recommend that you look at the outset. Thinking kind of in an overall vein as to how Dee Dee, myself, and Ruth, the others in our group, can help you in reaching your goals, we do a number of things, wear a number of different hats. One of the ones we enjoy is introducing buyers and sellers. We get calls, we get contacts. We try to stay very involved with the industry with a number of different providers, participate in association meetings, and do that kind of thing so that we can facilitate the introduction of folks who may want to sell some beds, who may want to buy some beds, who are looking for opportunities in particular markets. We do our best to be helpful to providers in making a considered and realistic determination as to what their project needs to look like and what would be the terms under which buyer and seller could come together to make a project work. Obviously, as a law firm, we would represent either the buyer or the seller. We can't be on both sides of a transaction, but again, as I said, we're happy to facilitate introductions amongst providers. So that is a way in which we try to add value to providers as they seek to meet their goals. We have a lot of wonderful relationships with bankers and enjoy those very much. We are happy to have, I think, Bank of America folks and SunTrust folks on the call with us today, and we are happy to make those introductions. Obviously, it's critically important in any of these deals to figure out very early how you're going to get your hands on the capital that you need to acquire the beds that you seek to add to your facility. If you're looking at doing a qualifying exemption project, a renovation project exceeding $2 million, how are you going to structure the financing to obtain the resources to make that happen? Obviously, it's important in a CON application to have your financing options defined for the state's review, and that's another way in which we're happy to put you together with our friends, the bankers, to see what options are available to you. Timing is obviously an important consideration when buying or selling beds, and I'll address the easy one and give it to Dee Dee to talk to you about the more complicated ones. If you're going across county lines, you're a Category J proposal, and for that you will file in July of this year. We're at the end of March now. The timing is just about perfect. If you can identify and make a move on an opportunity now, you are in time to allow yourself an opportunity to develop a conforming CON proposal, and those would be filed in July of this year.
Correct. The other type of proposal would involve relocating beds within a county, and those are going to be Category I filings, and the filing deadlines for those are dependent on your health service area location. So we looked at that map earlier that divided the state up into 6 different health service areas. So HSAs 1, 2, and 3 have 4 remaining filing deadlines for these Category I type proposals, as do HSAs 4 through 6. They also have 4 remaining filing opportunities. So for HSAs 1 through 3, the available filing opportunities this year are May, July, September, and October, and those filing deadlines fall on the 15th of the month. If the 15th is on a weekend, it goes to the next business day. For HSAs 4 through 6, also 4 available opportunities, 1 April 15th, June, August, and November.
So again, the opportunities in terms of projects that require CON filings are the ones that Dee Dee has outlined together with the July opportunity. And then, of course, the exemption proposals, projects that are exempt from review, you can file your prior written notice at any point during the year, as long as you do so in advance of undertaking any kind of obligation for expenditures relating to the project. It's critical that the notice be prior to, but not per a specific schedule. Again, how do we move forward when opportunities such as this are of interest? One of the initial steps from our perspective is to work with our client to develop a memorandum of understanding that's going to kind of define the rights and responsibilities of the parties on both sides of the transaction as to whether there's a CON filing, the timing of that, any number of different considerations from price right on down the list. And
number of beds. Certainly.
It's good to get that writing developed and agreed upon early in the process. Depending on the type of client, a larger client may want to create a subsidiary entity that would be the applicant under which the project would be proposed. We could certainly help you structure or create the entities that you need, or it may be as simple as proposing to buy the beds in the name of the existing facility to which the beds are to be added. So we don't add complexity, but we'll meet your needs as far as what you need to accomplish with structure. Again, as we've talked about, many of these projects can be pursued under the exemption process, but many will require a certificate of need, and advanced planning is always the key in getting together your best certificate of need filing to meet the legal requirements that apply, and we can certainly help you coordinate and plan to accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished within the applicable time frame set forth in the law. Of course, a CON project doesn't happen in a vacuum. You're working with architects, engineers, developers. You're looking at lease term sheets. You're looking at contracts under which the project will be developed. You may be dealing with management company and setting up a structure for management fees for the development and operation of the project. Project implementation, everything from progress reports to an unexpected zoning issue that may come up and require the input of legal counsel as you work to address yourself to something of that nature that may arise during the process. We have many years of experience in getting our hands dirty and involved with clients as to any number of issues that come along throughout project development. And then, of course, for everyone on the call, the objective here is to provide good patient care and obviously to do so in compliance with applicable law. So we're happy as well to take the opportunity during the CON process to work with you to review policies and procedures, see that those are up to date, that everything from privacy to billing and coding requirements are being done in a way that puts you where you want to be and hopefully positions you to have uneventful surveys and a lack of audits. But as those issues arise, we too try to really be a true partner with our clients in assisting them to meet their objectives for development and operation and the provision of good care to their residents. So that is truly our privilege and pleasure. Dee Dee, I don't know if there are a few questions that we should address in our final moments.
I think one piece that we want to address with everybody here on the phone, I'm sure you guys have all heard kind of the murmurs over at the General Assembly, and we definitely want to address the couple of bills that have been presented over there.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We're happy to be sitting here with a beautiful view of the General Assembly from our conference room window, and there are two bills pending. Representative Avila and several co-sponsors, I think Bishop, Collins, and perhaps another, have put in a bill that would modify the terms of the CON law. That's a more nuanced bill, if you will. There is a bill by Senator Apodaca that is a wholesale repeal of the CON law, and not a lot of nuance in that one. That would pull Article 9 out of the North Carolina General Statutes in its entirety. What we have learned, and we have great lawyer lobbyists in our ranks here at Williams-Mullen, is that Representative Avila's bill has been referred to 3 committees, which may make that bill one that will be difficult to reach the floor. As to the Senator's bill, the last word we heard is that it had been referred to the Rules Committee. So unlike Representative Avila's bill that received assignment to multiple committees, the last we heard, the Senator's bill has only gone to Rules Committee. So we will be watching with interest. I think every year there's a run on CON and folks propose to modify the law. Probably the last big change we saw, Dee Dee, was
93, I believe.
And so, there have been certainly changes in the interim years, but nothing sweeping. And so we're keeping our eyes out for what may occur there. Obviously, hospital industry representatives as well as others are proposing opposing, I should say, the Senator's bill, and it'll be interesting to see what transpires with that in the days ahead. If any of you at any point have questions about what's going on at the General Assembly, feel free to email us. Like I say, Dee Dee and I are not over there on a regular basis, but there are certainly folks within our law firm who are. So if we can provide any updated information to you, we will be happy to do so.
Definitely. We also invite you you've got our contact information, to reach out to us with any questions that you may have regarding today's webinar topic. We also invite you to make any suggestions on any potential future webinar topics. We always like to hear from folks in the industry about what's relevant to your organization at the time, and to the extent that we could address that, we would be more than happy to do so. As I indicated earlier, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation to you all, and if any of you guys on the call are wishing to seek continuing education approval, please send me, Dee Dee Murphy, an email, and I can send you the certificate that you'll have to sign and submit. And we hope that you all have a great day, and we appreciate your participation.
Thank you so much.